They thought he didn't belong there. The staff smirked, whispering behind his back. Customers glanced at him like he was a nobody. In their world, luxury wasn't for people like him. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the man they were looking down on was one of the kindest, most legendary figures in Hollywood. And when karma finally hit, oh, it hit hard. Stick around, because this is not just a story about arrogance and judgment. This is about character, humility, and a lesson in true class. Before we dive in, subscribe to Storygram, because tomorrow, we have another story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the world. Now, let's begin. Luxury boutiques have a certain air about them. The kind that instantly tells you, if you don't belong here, they'll make sure you know it. From the soft glow of designer lights to the scent of overpriced cologne in the air, these places aren't just about selling clothes, they're about selling status. And on that particular day, they thought he had none. The staff inside La Maison de Luxe, one of the most exclusive high-end boutiques in Beverly Hills, prided themselves on catering to the elite. Their usual clientele? Oil tycoons, celebrities, and socialites with more money than common sense. So when a tall man walked through the doors dressed in worn-out jeans, a basic black t-shirt, and boots that had clearly seen better days, the reactions were immediate. A young sales associate, Brittany, barely looked up from her phone before rolling her eyes. "Oh great," she muttered to her coworker Taylor. "Another window shopper." Taylor smirked. "Yeah, or worse, a tourist. Watch, he's going to ask for prices and then pretend he left his wallet at home." They giggled. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that this window shopper was none other than Keanu Reeves. Yes, that Keanu Reeves. The John Wick legend. The Matrix icon. The guy who had made hundreds of millions in Hollywood yet still took the subway, still tipped waiters 200%, and still lived with more humility than half of Los Angeles combined. But in their eyes, he was nobody. Just another guy who didn't belong. And so, the game began. Keanu walked in with zero attitude. No entourage, no security, no flashing cameras. He was simply there to browse. He ran his fingers along a sleek black suit jacket on display, appreciating the craftsmanship. Classic cut, Italian fabric, the kind of thing that whispered wealth instead of screaming it. That's when Brittany decided to make her move. She sauntered up, flipping her perfect blonde ponytail, and gave him a smile so fake it could have been factory-made. "Can I help you?" The words dripped with condescension. Not the kind that invited assistance, the kind that translated to, "You clearly can't afford anything here, so let's hurry this along." Keanu, unfazed, nodded politely. "Yeah, I was looking for something classic. Maybe a three-piece suit?" Brittany's expression didn't change, but inside, she was already dismissing him. "Oh, this will be fun." "Oh," she drawled, glancing him up and down, making sure he knew she was judging his clothes. "We only carry high-end European designers. Nothing off the rack." Keanu just smiled. "That's fine." But she wasn't done. "I mean, our starting price is around $8,000. And that's just for the blazer." A pause. A challenge. She waited for the telltale signs, the gulp, the awkward shuffle, the I'll just look around. But instead, Keanu just nodded. "Okay." She blinked. That's it? No reaction? No stuttering excuse? She recovered quickly, flipping the script. "Of course, I'd be happy to show you something more affordable." "No," Keanu interrupted, his voice even. "Show me the best one you've got." Brittany's forced smile twitched. "What?" Taylor, still eavesdropping from behind the counter, snorted. "Oh, this guy is hilarious," she whispered to another employee. "Bet he thinks he's in a movie scene right now." But Brittany, now slightly intrigued, motioned for Keanu to follow her to the private client section. What she didn't know was that this was about to be the biggest mistake of her day. Inside the VIP room, the racks held the kind of suits that could make a CEO look like royalty. Deep navy wools, razor-sharp black tuxedos, handcrafted, each piece stitched by artisans who had probably never seen a price tag below 5 figures. Brittany pulled a suit off the rack. Custom, limited edition, $15,000. She didn't offer to help him try it on. She just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for him to crack. Keanu took the suit and ran his hand over the fabric. He knew quality when he saw it. "This is nice," he said. She bit back a smirk. "It's our most exclusive piece. Designed for serious buyers." That was it. The last push. She was sure he'd fold. He'd make an excuse. He'd back off. Instead, Keanu nodded. "I'll take it." Silence. Brittany blinked. Taylor's jaw almost hit the floor from behind the counter. Excuse me? Brittany stammered. I'll take it, Keanu repeated, completely calm. And I'd like a few more. Brittany just stood there. Processing. Because here's the thing about people like her, they operate on assumptions. If you don't look rich, you must not be. If you don't act superior, you must be beneath them. And Keanu? He had just flipped her world upside down. Now, you'd think this is where Brittany would immediately change her tune, apologize, or suddenly treat Keanu like royalty. No, instead? She doubled down. Oh well, she stalled, searching for an escape. We, require a credit check for purchases over $30,000. Keanu raised an eyebrow. A credit check? Taylor, now standing nearby, jumped in. Yes, sir. Store policy for certain transactions. You understand. It wasn't store policy. It was their policy. For people like him. They still thought they could get rid of him. Keanu, still calm, just nodded. All right. He reached into his pocket. And what happened next completely broke them. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out something that instantly shut down every whisper, every judgmental glance, and every ounce of arrogance in the room. A sleek, matte black Amex Centurion card. The kind of card that doesn't have a limit. The kind that you don't apply for, they invite you. The kind that could buy this entire boutique 10 times over without blinking. Brittany's breath caught in her throat. Taylor, standing just behind her, felt his stomach drop. Because in that moment, they both realized exactly who they were dealing with. Not some broke tourist. Not some nobody trying to look rich. But Keanu. Freaking Reeves. The very same Keanu Reeves whose name alone carried more weight than every luxury brand in this store combined. For the first time since he walked in, the power dynamic shifted. Keanu, completely unfazed, held out the card. Will this do? Brittany scrambled to recover, plastering on her best fake smile. Oh. Mr. Reeves, I didn't recognize you at first. Her voice had transformed, suddenly sweet, dripping with forced enthusiasm. Of course, there's no need for a credit check. It was just, standard procedure for, you know. Taylor jumped in, laughing nervously. Just a store policy. Nothing personal, sir. Keanu said nothing. He just held their gaze, still waiting, still perfectly calm. The silence stretched. And in that silence, Brittany and Taylor realized something even worse than their mistake. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't making a scene. He was just looking at them. And somehow, that was infinitely worse. Because when you're caught treating someone like garbage, you expect retaliation. You expect defensiveness, ego, and a fight. But Keanu wasn't giving them that. He was just letting them drown in their own embarrassment. Finally, Brittany coughed, desperately shifting gears. Let me, personally wrap these up for you, Mr. Reeves. She practically grabbed the suits out of his hands. Would you like a coffee while you wait? Water? Champagne? The desperation was leaking through her voice now. Keanu smiled. No thanks. He let them rush off, watching as Brittany and Taylor scrambled to prepare his purchase, suddenly moving with the urgency of people who knew their jobs were on the line. While they worked, another employee, a quiet, older woman who had been folding scarves at the counter, finally spoke. I knew it was you, she said, walking over. Keanu turned to her, surprised. She smiled warmly. I just didn't say anything because I figured you didn't want the attention. He gave a small chuckle. Appreciate that. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. For what it's worth, not all of us act like them. Keanu nodded, appreciating the honesty. A few minutes later, Brittany returned, suits perfectly packed in glossy black bags. All set, Mr. Reeves. Thank you so much for shopping with us today. He took the bags, pausing for just a second. Then, with that same calm voice, he asked one final question. Do you work on commission? Brittany's heart jumped. Why, yes, sir. Keanu smiled. Good. And then, he turned, walked past her, and handed a $500 tip to the quiet woman who had shown him kindness. Not a word to Brittany. Not a glance. Just a clean, brutal message. The only kind that truly stings people like her. He left the store as effortlessly as he walked in. No outburst, no drama. Just Keanu being Keanu. And Brittany? She stood frozen, red-faced, humiliated, watching as the biggest sale of her month, and the biggest lesson of her life, walked right out the door. Keanu stepped out of the boutique, the weight of the shopping bags barely noticeable in his hands. The cool afternoon air hit his face, fresh and crisp, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension he had just left behind. He didn't need to turn around to know what was happening inside. He could already picture it: Brittany standing there, face flushed, her stomach twisting with regret. Taylor avoided her gaze, trying to act like he hadn't just watched her torpedo their biggest commission of the day. And the quiet woman? She was still holding the $500 tip in her hands, probably staring down at it in disbelief. Keanu never liked making scenes. He never needed to. People like Brittany and Taylor always wrote their own downfall. As he walked down the street, his thoughts drifted, not to the boutique, not to their mistake, but to something else entirely. A memory. A much younger version of himself, standing outside a different store in a different part of town, looking through the window at a leather jacket he couldn't afford. He had been broke then. A struggling actor barely making ends meet. Back when he had first arrived in Hollywood, he had optimism in his heart, determination in his eyes, but nothing in his pockets. He had walked into a store just like that boutique, high-end, elegant, catering to a different world than the one he lived in. And just like today, he had been greeted with skepticism. The kind of look that says, "You don't belong here." Only back then had there been no Centurion card in his pocket. No movie deals. No fame. Just a kid chasing a dream. He had left that store empty-handed, stomach tight with the familiar ache of rejection. And he had promised himself that one day, if he ever made it, he would never treat people the way they had treated him. That's why he never judged people based on their clothes, their bank accounts, or whether they looked like they could afford something. Because he had been that kid. And he knew how it felt. The memory faded as Keanu reached his motorcycle, a sleek black Norton Commando that gleamed under the afternoon sun. He placed the shopping bags carefully on the seat, slipping his helmet over his head. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. People like Brittany and Taylor existed everywhere. The real question was, would they learn from it? As he kicked the engine to life, he knew that, at least for today, one of them had. The quiet woman, the one who had recognized him but had chosen respect over spectacle, she had gotten something far more valuable than just a tip. She had gotten validation. Proof that kindness always pays off in the end. With that thought, Keanu revved the engine and rode off, disappearing into the city like he always did, without a fuss, without a scene, just a man who had nothing to prove to anyone. But back in that boutique, the lesson he left behind? That would linger a little longer. Back in the boutique, the silence was suffocating. Brittany stood frozen behind the counter, her mind racing through the events that had just unfolded. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her name tag, a nervous tic she didn't even realize she had. Taylor leaned against the glass display case, arms crossed, his face unreadable. He wasn't looking at her. In fact, he hadn't said a word since Keanu Reeves walked out the door. The weight of what had just happened settled in. They had humiliated Keanu Reeves. Not some random guy off the street. Not some wannabe influencer pretending to have money. Keanu. Freaking Reeves. The same man who had starred in some of the biggest movies of the past 3 decades. The same man who was known for being one of the kindest celebrities in Hollywood. And what had she done? She had assumed. Judged. Belittled. And now she could feel it, her own stomach twisting with the realization of how badly she had screwed up. The quiet woman, Sarah, was still standing near the back of the store, the $500 tip clutched in her fingers like it might disappear if she let go. She had been the only one to treat him with respect, and she had been rewarded for it. Brittany swallowed hard, her throat dry. She needed to fix this. She needed to do something. But what? Apologize? Chase after him? Would that even make a difference? She looked at Taylor, searching for some kind of answer, some kind of reassurance. But when he finally turned to face her, his expression wasn't what she expected. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sympathy. It was disappointment. "You know what your problem is?" he said finally, his voice low and measured. Brittany blinked. "What?" Taylor sighed, shaking his head. "You think you're better than people." The words hit her like a slap. She opened her mouth to argue, to defend herself, but nothing came out. Because deep down, she knew he was right. She had spent years perfecting the art of sizing people up, determining who was worth her time and who wasn't. It was how she had built her career, how she had learned to survive in the competitive world of high-end retail. But today, she had been wrong. And it had cost her. Taylor turned away, running a hand through his hair. "I'm going to take my break." With that, he walked toward the back of the store, leaving Brittany standing alone in the awkward silence. She let out a shaky breath, staring at her reflection in the glass display case. For the first time in a long time, she didn't like what she saw. And for the first time ever, she wasn't sure how to fix it. Brittany stood there, the weight of her mistake pressing down on her like a physical force. She had been working in luxury retail for years, but never had she felt so small, so utterly exposed for what she truly was beneath the designer clothes and rehearsed charm. Someone who had let arrogance cloud her judgment. Her reflection in the display case looked different now. It wasn't just her perfectly done makeup, her carefully curated image of sophistication. It was the doubt in her eyes. The creeping realization that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as good at reading people as she thought. Sarah, the quiet woman who had treated Keanu with kindness, was still standing near the register, turning the crisp $500 bill in her fingers like it was some kind of relic. The look on her face wasn't smug, wasn't gloating. Just thoughtful. Brittany swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak. Sarah. Sarah looked up, her expression neutral. What was it? Brittany asked, her voice quieter than she meant for it to be. Sarah tilted her head. What was what? Brittany exhaled sharply. How did you know? How did you know he wasn't just some random guy wasting our time? Sarah hesitated, then gave a small shrug. I didn't. Brittany blinked. What? I didn't know he was Keanu Reeves, Sarah clarified. I just knew he was a person. The words hung in the air between them, cutting through Brittany's defenses like a blade. A person. Not a VIP. Not a big spender. Not a potential commission. Just a person. Brittany let out a shaky breath and turned her gaze toward the glass doors of the boutique, as if Keanu might still be out there. But of course he was gone. The moment had passed. And she had let it slip through her fingers. The door chimed suddenly, breaking the silence, and she turned sharply, half hoping, half praying that somehow miraculously he had come back. But it wasn't him. It was their manager, Lillian. Lillian was a woman in her late 40s, elegant and ruthless in equal measure. She had built this boutique into one of the most exclusive stores in the city, and she ran it with an iron fist. Every sales associate feared her approval, but more importantly, they feared losing it. She paused just inside the entrance, slipping off her designer sunglasses and taking in the scene with sharp, calculating eyes. Where's Taylor? She asked. Brittany cleared her throat, straightening instinctively. Taking his break. Lillian nodded slightly, then turned her attention to Sarah. Slow day? Sarah hesitated. Not exactly. Lillian arched an eyebrow. Oh? Brittany felt her stomach twist. She knew what was coming. Sarah glanced at Brittany, as if debating whether to say anything. Then, she carefully set the $500 bill on the counter. We had a customer earlier, she said finally. He left this as a tip. Lillian's gaze flicked to the money, then back to Sarah. A tip? Sarah nodded. Lillian's lips curved into a knowing smirk. Let me guess. Big spender? Brittany's hands curled into fists at her sides. Sarah hesitated just for a second before shaking her head. Not exactly. Lillian's smirk faltered slightly. Then who was it? And for the first time since it happened, Brittany spoke up. It was Keanu Reeves. The words felt strange coming out of her mouth, like saying them out loud made the reality of the situation even heavier. Lillian blinked. Then, very slowly, she turned to fully face Brittany. Excuse me? Brittany swallowed. Keanu Reeves. He was here. And she hesitated, feeling Sarah's eyes on her, and forced herself to continue. We misjudged him. Lillian stared at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with the grace of someone who had perfected the art of controlling a room, she stepped forward and picked up the $500 bill, inspecting it with a critical eye. Well, she murmured. That's unfortunate. Brittany felt a flicker of something. Hope, maybe? Maybe Lillian understood. Maybe she would let this go. Maybe. Then Lillian's eyes met hers. I assume he was taken care of properly? Brittany opened her mouth. Then closed it. Because the truth was no. No, he hadn't been. Lillian's gaze darkened, and the air in the boutique suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. You do realize, she said, her voice dangerously soft, that if word gets out that we treated Keanu Reeves, a beloved Hollywood icon, like a common beggar, this boutique's reputation could be ruined. Brittany's stomach twisted. She hadn't even thought about that. Lillian continued, her voice as smooth as silk but sharp as a blade. Do you have any idea how quickly a story like this could spread? The damage it could do? Brittany wanted to defend herself. Wanted to explain that it wasn't like that. That they hadn't meant to be rude. That it was all a misunderstanding. But deep down, she knew that wouldn't matter. The reality was simple. She had messed up. And now, she was going to pay for it. Brittany felt like the walls of the boutique were closing in around her. Lillian's words weren't loud, but they carried more weight than if she had screamed at her. Every syllable was a knife, cutting through her carefully constructed confidence. I should fire you for this. The words landed like a punch to the gut. Brittany's breath hitched. She had been here for years. She had built her career in luxury retail, working her way up from folding silk scarves to handling VIP clients. She knew how things worked in this world, how reputation was everything. And now, because of one mistake, one misjudgment, she was standing at the edge of losing it all. She started, but Lillian held up a hand. Spare me the excuses. Sarah shifted uncomfortably at the counter, looking like she wanted to say something but knew better than to interrupt. Lillian exhaled sharply and placed the crisp $500 bill back on the counter. She tapped a manicured nail against it. This is the only reason I'm even considering letting you stay. Brittany swallowed hard. Lillian gave her a look that could freeze fire. Do you have any idea how much damage control I have to do now? If he mentions this to anyone, if this somehow ends up on social media, our reputation, my reputation, is on the line. Brittany nodded quickly, her heart pounding. I understand. It won't happen again. Lillian tilted her head, studying her, then turned to Sarah. And you? Sarah blinked. Me? Yes, you. He left you the tip. Why? Sarah hesitated, then shrugged. I treated him like a regular customer. Lillian's lips pressed into a thin line. Lucky for you, that worked in our favor. Brittany flinched. The worst part was she hadn't meant to treat him badly. She had just assumed. She had done what she had been trained to do, assess a customer in the first few seconds, figure out if they were worth the effort. And she had gotten it wrong. Painfully, humiliatingly wrong. Lillian stepped forward, closing the space between them, lowering her voice. Brittany, listen to me very carefully. From now on, you never assume. I don't care if a customer walks in wearing a garbage bag, you treat them like they own the building. Do you understand? Brittany nodded quickly. Yes, absolutely. Lillian let the silence stretch for a moment longer before straightening. Good. Because if this ever happens again, you won't just be out of a job, you'll be blacklisted. The weight of the threat was suffocating. Luxury retail was a small world. If Lillian made a call, Brittany wouldn't just lose this job. She'd lose every opportunity in high-end fashion. No boutique would touch her. No brand would hire her. She would be done. Lillian exhaled through her nose and turned to Sarah. And you? Since he left you the tip, I assume you have no complaints. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. No complaints. Lillian gave a tight smile. Smart. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and walked to the back office, heels clicking against the marble floor. As soon as the door shut behind her, Brittany let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Sarah glanced at her, her expression unreadable. Brittany opened her mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to defend herself, but before she could say anything, the boutique door chimed again. Another customer. Another moment to redeem herself. Brittany took a deep breath, plastered on her best smile, and turned to greet them. Because now, she knew better. And she wasn't about to make the same mistake twice.